last one is a 2024 Romantasy novel by Rachel Howzell Hall. It was a nominee for the She Reads Best of Award for Romantasy in 2024, and it was also a Good Morning America book club pick. This is another Entangled book, aka Red Tower, the ones who put out Fourth Wing, and like many Red Tower publications, it benefited from a lot of attention when it was first released, so I came by a copy recently, decided to give it a read, opened up to Goodreads to get a look at the rating, and... Yikes. Yeah, this looks like another Sanctuary of the Shadow situation, which naturally made me even more curious about the book. We first meet our protagonist, Kai, as she wakes up in a forest being burgled by Olivia. Kai can tell that Olivia, as well as a good chunk of the people she sees, are dying based off the colors clinging to them. In this case, death is represented by amber. She follows Olivia to her home, a town ridden with disease, poverty, and apparently so desperate for water that people run outside with buckets when it starts to rain. Kai recognizes none of this because she has amnesia. She doesn't even remember her name, never mind who she is and what she was doing in the forest in the first place. After attacking Olivia to get her stuff back, Kai is besieged by the villagers, including an older lady who speaks to her telepathically. And after that, of course, Kai can read minds now. I cannot escape this trope. Although, in sheer fairness, at least it's blanket telepathy and not just super special me and my love interest telepathy. Said love interest shows up pretty quickly. He's Olivia's brother, Blacksmith Jaden, and both try to intervene and stop Kai from being thrown in the clink and potentially bad-touched by the jailer. The rest of the town seems to be freaking out over Kai's appearance, implying that she's an invader from an enemy that's been harassing them. Kai doesn't remember a damn thing, so she has no way of knowing. She ends up going home with them and sleeping in the loft above their barn. Olivia then drops some lore. Their god is called the Supreme. The Vial is basically the devil, and there's a guy named Emperor Wake, who is supposedly immortal, who demands that everyone worship him as the Supreme or die. He thinks that all of Valandor is his, and is currently trying to make that vision a reality by conquering anyone who refuses to submit willingly. The people of Mayford, the town that Olivia and Jaden live in, are planning to do exactly that when he shows up because they don't want to die. A fact that Kai is weirdly judgmental of, because evidently this bitch isn't able to add 1, the bedraggled state of the people she's seen thus far, and 1, the implication that Emperor Wake is an emperor and obviously has an army, to make 2, that being that obviously any attempt to resist the emperor is going to result in a ridiculously one-sided slaughter. But apparently our darling girl boss finds it pitiful that a bunch of starving, dying peasants are giving up before the fight has even started. Ooh, I like her. She's so smart and compassionate. When Kai tells the siblings that she can't remember anything, Olivia starts spitballing ideas and happens to come up with her being a falling star, which pings something in Kai's gray matter, which then leads to Olivia explaining that she saw something like a shooting star falling out of the sky and landing in the forest, which is why she was there in the first place, and now my gray matter is being pinged because this is starting to sound exactly like the recently disgraced Neil Gaiman's Stardust. I should also throw in here that shortly after this, we're informed that Kai's hair is a cloud of mulberry, sapphire blue, and cinnamon-hued curls? That sure paints a picture. Anyway, Kai was let out of a prison stint under the promise of paying a fine, so now she has to get to work to earn enough money to pay it off. She spends some time around the siblings and the people of Mayford, and learns a bit more of the lore, the meat of which is that Emperor Wake is sweeping away the other religions of the area. One of those faiths has followers who pray to the Lady of the Verdant Realm, aka Kaivara. Gee, isn't that convenient? In sheer fairness, the first theory is that Kai was named for this goddess, which is a very reasonable possibility, not unusual for people to name their children for gods, even in real life. But she's a god, just so we're clear. Shh, that revelation comes later. Anyway, Kai spends some time in the miserable little town before Emperor Wake's people sweep in and try to take it over, resulting in Kai and Jaden and a handful of other guys having to fight them off. But then soon after, a lady named Ellen comes in with some freaky-looking guards claiming to be looking for Kai, and when no one gives her up, she sicks a bunch of monsters on the town. While fleeing with Jaden, Olivia, and Olivia's girlfriend Philia, a snake saves Kai from the jailers that accosted her on the first day in the village, and she says, quote, "I'm leaving now, I tell my serpent friend. Thank you for coming to my aid. Help yourself to all of this," I gesture to the rotting town. "Except for the candlemaker, his kin, the Garys, and their little dog Milo. Don't make yourself sick on it, though." Unquote. You can probably figure this out, but all the people she listed are the ones that were nice to her while she was there. Everyone else that didn't have a chance to prove to Kai that they were worthy of living, including any village children, well, they get to die. Put a pin in that. So then the gang sets off. This is where the recap gets a bit sparse, and I'm gonna go into this more in the analysis, but they basically encounter monsters and soldiers a handful of times. Kai and Jaden flirt. They meet Veril the Sapient, who is reminiscent of Radagast the Brown, I'd say, but not nearly as interesting or badass. Then Olivia disappears with Kai's pendant, and we find out that she and Jaden aren't actually brother and sister, and that Olivia's escaping an arranged marriage. Then Veril gets murked by the Emperor's men, and I've never cared less about anything in my life. Towards the end of the book, we get slammed with several revelations. One, yes, Kai is the goddess Kaivara, and she was tricked by some big baddie named Danar Revi into destroying her home and therefore accidentally killing her mom. Shortly before this, we learn that Jaden is actually Emperor Wake's older son and heir, and his brother, Gillian Wake, is the one that Olivia is engaged to marry. There's also a big battle at the end, and it turns out that Jaden and Gillian are fighting against the Emperor. And then also, surprise, Jaden is actually the son of Danar Revi, whatever, and is the one somehow spreading the miasma because he's like the fantasy antichrist or whatever. Kai is super pissed off about Jaden, but she decides to use him to get revenge on all those who have wronged her, and the book ends on a cliffhanger where Kai says she now remembers everything. Okay, so there were two things that stood out to me at the beginning of this book. The first was the trigger warning. Quote, "The last one is a tale of rage and magic and the desires that set the world ablaze. The story includes elements that might not be suitable for all readers, including battle and combat, injury, death, illness, amnesia, grief, perilous situations, burning, poisoning, graphic language, racism, alcohol use, and sexual activity on the page. Imprisonment, assault, homophobia, and animal abuse are mentioned. Readers who may be sensitive to these elements, please take note and prepare to enter the realm of Valandor." Unquote. Okay. If you saw my video on the games gods play, you might recall that I went on a little rant about its trigger warning. Long story short, I don't like trigger warnings in books. Adult books, anyway, but I support a creator's right to do whatever they want with their book. Long story short, I do not like trigger warnings in books, but I support a creator's right to do whatever they want with their book. If they want to include a trigger warning, that's their prerogative. But I do not like trigger warnings, mostly because as it grows more common, there's a certain chunk of readers that are starting to develop the view that they are entitled to trigger warnings in every single book that they read. If you have certain mental health issues or sensitivities, and it's really that big of a deal that you not engage with them, then you need to avail yourself of the dozens of websites and forums at your disposal to get the information that you need. Authors are not responsible for your mental health and have zero, and I do mean zero, obligation to provide you with trigger warnings. I will die on this hill in full fucking armor with my flag held high. Mental illness and trauma is not your fault, but it is your responsibility and no one else's, especially not a stranger who just happened to publish a book. You are a grown-up and you are responsible for yourself. The last one, incidentally, does the same thing that the Games Gods Play did in its trigger warning, and it's made me a bit frothy, because the other hill I will die on in full regalia upon is the fact that an adult reader does not need to be warned about perilous situations in a fantasy book. Adult readers do not need to be warned about amnesia, they do not need to be warned about alcohol use, and they don't need to be warned about imprisonment. Period. End of story. Not taking questions or comments on this one. Adults don't need warnings for those things, and if they do, they need to be gently directed to mental health services, not catered to. At some point, we have to have common sense here. At some point, we have to say, no, actually, if you, as a whole-ass adult, do not have the common sense to recognize that an adult fantasy book might have perilous situations in it, then that is a you problem, and no one should take you seriously. As I said in my other review, while I disagree with trigger warnings, I do understand why an author might feel compelled to warn for things like sexual violence, gore and torture, or domestic abuse, especially if those things are unusually graphic within the book that they're writing. I may not agree with the choice, but I do get the mentality behind it. But I absolutely refuse to validate this trend of let's warn for the most basic bog tier features of the genre just in case a grown-ass adult gets a little uncomfy when the characters get into some majorly yucky situations. I refuse. And if I'm being 100% real, I'm side-eyeing anyone who does think it's a good idea. The more that tiny minority of highly sensitive people gets catered to, the bolder they get about making demands of all the other authors who are not ready to warn for those things, which increases the odds of publishers taking them seriously. I am not here for it. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. It probably won't be my last one. The The second thing that stood out to me was the poem at the beginning of the book. Quote, "In a land where stars make pearls, a heroine awakens, her soul unfurls. Through realms unknown her path lies bare, a future that she cannot share. Hear the echoes in the breeze, and hear the break of bending trees. Enchanted woods and deserts grand, in this land she makes her stand. Beneath the copse of leafy trees, she fought with nerve, fell to her knees. A warrior with a heart of gold, with fierce ambition, with ire bold. Hear the echoes in the breeze, she is the one who will not please. Tempestuous seas and mountains vast, in this land she stands at last. In the maze of shadows dark, her mind reflects, her memories spark. The gods they sing in realms above, her mother's journey, proof of love. Through shifting sands and mountains high, she pushed the wind and touched the sky. A wanderer true and heart so free, where dreams and truth sought to agree. Hear the echoes in the breeze, she is the one who will not please. Endless meadows and steep plateaus, in this land she conquers foes. As day star sets in foreign sky, a requiem and a lullaby. The quilt shrinks to a cosmic strand, her legend hailed in this strange land." Unquote. This is an elegy attributed to Vero Bernal the Sapient, that being the dude Kai and the others meet on their journey who got murked, and I've never given a shit about anything less in my life. I initially assumed that this was just a thing to kick off the book, but then I realized that the author put, like, 4 or 5 other elegies at the head of each new part in the book, and there's, like, 5 of them, I think, give or take, so that would be, like, 5 or 6 of these throughout the book. So, let me be clear. I am not here to just mindlessly shit on the author and her writing, alright? Nothing is forever, everybody's capable of improvement. One poorly written book doesn't mean you're incapable of writing well. But, holy, I'm 14 and this is deep, Batman. Okay, let me talk about the issues with this poem, which will encompass my basic issue with all the other poems in the book. Number 1, obviously, is the writing. If you ask me how old the author was, I would say preteen, early teenager. It reads like the kind of poetry I was writing back in high school. There is an effort here, I think, to imitate the poetry of yore, espousing the heroism and deeds of a particular historical or mythological figure. The problem is that the author is either A, not good at writing poetry, or B, not really capable of emulating the style or genre of poetry she's basing hers off of, or she only has a very surface level understanding of how these poems are structured. It's not subtle. It's very specific to the events of the story. Her mind reflects, her memories spark, and it's very girl bossy. A wanderer true, her heart so free. She is the one who will not please. There's a sort of, again, I would characterize it as an immature voice in here. It sounds like what someone who isn't really familiar with poetry would try to write as a way to espouse her character's virtues, not how an actual third party would write about a goddess he admires. And don't get me wrong, I'm not really big into poetry either, but kind of like how I don't have to be a chef to know when the food in front of me is poorly prepared, I don't have to be a poet to know when a poem is not written very well. Also, that bit about touching the sky had me thinking of Disney's Brave. The second issue with this poem that compounds with the first one is that it is placed directly at the front of the book. As in, it's one of the first things you see before starting the story. I actually missed the trigger warning the first time I opened the book and immediately landed on the poem, and upon reading it, I just did a little, ooh. The poem immediately sets my expectations for the remainder of the novel. I made this same argument with Empress Teresa's cover art. It's not just that it's bad, it's that the author took a look at it before publishing and said, you know what? Yeah, that slaps. That's a perfect representation of my writing. I actually got this book from a friend, so I didn't pay anything for it, but if I was browsing at a store and picked this up and immediately read that poem, nope, back to the shelf. I am not spending a whopping $32.99 for a book with that quality of writing, no matter how gorgeous the cover art is. Sometimes you can only realize what a book's quality is after you've read a little bit of it. Putting a very quick-to-read poem at the beginning is like giving the reader / potential buyer a warning of what's coming. I strongly recommend caution when trying to write poetry or songs into your book if you are not already familiar with and accustomed to the conventions and technicalities of that genre of writing. You can cheat. There are ways around this. These elegies did not need to be here. They added nothing to the story and frankly only highlighted that the author was not skilled enough to pull off this style of poetry. And that's not the end of the world. One not so well written fantasy book doesn't mean you can't write a good one. This is a skill that can be developed with time and effort. I'm not saying that the author is shit at writing. I'm saying that she maybe needs to develop her skills a bit more. Moving on, I am so torn about Kai as a character. Because on one hand, there is some evidence in this book that she's meant to be a violent, cruel person. She's known in the main mythology of the world as a destroyer, and Ellen actually confirms that she's destroyed several places before, including her homeland and subsequently her mother, but that was also because Kai was tricked into it, so I'm not really counting that one against her. But she basically tells the giant snake that comes along with it that it's cool to kill everyone in Mayford, except the people that she explicitly dislikes, which, again, means that anyone who didn't explicitly earn her favor is dead. Good job, Kai. Now, if I'm interpreting this as the behavior of a destructive goddess, that makes some sense. But the problem here is that Kai seems to be going out of her way to reinforce this idea that Mayford is a shitty place full of shitty people, and therefore at the end of the day, they deserve what she's given them. I am torn, because on one hand, Kai is a bitch destroyer goddess, and being petty and lacking in mercy fits that. But on the other, the author seems to be trying to convince me that, well, Kai is actually a good person, and these people just deserved it. I need you to understand that the biggest issue here is the writing. I am saying this as kindly as I possibly can without beating around the bush. The writing in this book is not good. The author has written things before this, and I haven't read any of those things, so I can't vouch for how well they are or are not written. But the last one reads like a debut novel from an inexperienced author. It tells instead of shows, it doesn't develop its characters, and the world building is all over the place. On my main channel, back when I did book reviews over there, I did a review for Sanctuary of the Shadow, another book talk romantasy book, I think also by Red Tower or Entangled Publishing, that is poorly rated by its target audience. The last one feels a lot like Sanctuary of the Shadow in the sense that the author does not seem to have the skill to write a fantasy book. And that's not a condemnation, because those skills can be developed with time. When writing a book with fantasy or sci-fi elements, as an author you have to try to do your best to step back and try to view your writing from the audience's perspective. Try to forget all of the lore you have in your head and ask yourself, what have I told my audience about these characters? What have I told them about the world and lore? Maybe more importantly, what have I implied about these things? What hints have I given that I need to follow up on later? Do the words and behaviors of my characters line up with how I want my audience to view them? I kind of get the vibe that this author, whether because she's inexperienced at writing fantasy or because she was maybe on a time crunch, had all this stuff in her head and all the threads are connected and make sense to her, but for whatever reason she was not able to cohesively tie things together on paper. So coming back to my original point, I'm torn on Kai's character because of the writing. It is possible that the author was trying to illustrate Kai's destructive bitch goddess tendencies by destroying Mayford. But also, Sybil was able to get her to stop and muster up some mercy and kindness towards an animal. But also, Ellen calls out Kai for destroying Mayford towards the end of the book. Likewise, Kai being a bit of an arrogant ass who judges poor sick villagers for not wanting to get curb stomped by Emperor Wake could be that goddess behavior coming out. Or it could just be Kai herself having selective empathy. At the same time, I can't dismiss the possibility that Kai's negative attributes were unintentional. Based off of the quality of the writing and the fact that Mayford was characterized as an overtly hostile place for Kai, I kind of suspect that the bit where she tells the snake it can murder everyone who didn't explicitly kiss her ass or act kindly towards her was meant to be seen as a vengeful female rage moment, which is very popular in TikTok books. They were nasty to her, so ignore the fact that they're starving, ignore the fact that they're living in poverty, ignore the fact that the town is suffering from a plague, ignore the fact that they're expecting an invasion from Emperor Wake, ignore the fact that this is a medieval fantasy and these people have no magic and their ability to defend themselves is limited. Forget all of that. They should have immediately been nice and welcoming to the stranger who might hail from an enemy state. I don't know. It kind of felt like Kai was good and kind when the author needed her to be, and a cold, destructive bitch with no regrets when she needed her to be too. And you can have a basically good character who also has that sort of soldier mentality of I can be violent when I have to, but there has to be some sort of internal consistency and consistent characterization and development of that characterization to make that work. And Kai just sort of seemed all over the place. This whole book was all over the place, honestly. Going off my previous point about how it felt like the author had the threads all tied together in her head and just never translated that to the page, I really don't have a solid idea of what Valandor looks like, and the lore is just scattershot, honestly. All of these names get thrown out, but in nearly 500 pages, none of them are developed very deeply. Much of the novel involves the gang running into creatures or soldiers and having to fight them. Names of creatures, places, figures, gods, all those get tossed out into the ether, but very few things actually end up mattering to the plot. I was looking at the reviews for the sequel to this book, The Cruel Dawn, which is out as of my scripting for this review, and someone in a review said that it read like it was the 6th book in this series, not the 2nd. And I feel like that encapsulates my issues with this book. There is too much, and yet somehow not enough. We get so many fantasy names thrown at us, but those things don't come together to paint a picture of this fantasy world. It's a random assortment of fantasy features tossed into a pot without actually taking the time to mix them all together in a way that makes sense. This is the same issue I had with Sanctuary of the Shadow. There is this skeleton of a fantasy world here, but the innards are just scattered everywhere. Again, the author has plenty of ideas and things that she wants to include here, but not the skill to tie them together into a cohesive fantasy world and therefore a well-written story. And again, doesn't have to be a permanent problem. Writing is a skill. It can be developed. Part of that involves reading fantasy books and paying attention to how successful authors add details to their world in subtle ways and how they develop the fantasy elements of their stories without being heavy-handed or, alternatively, too vague. The author could very well come up with a better fantasy book with more time, editing, and study of the genre. What else? Oh, of course we have my favorite trope, the mind reading. I've discussed before how this trope insists on jumping me, beating my ass, and then rifling through my wallet, because it is a very, very common trope in Romantasy. Sometimes as a way to cheat and provide instant communication in a fantasy world without cell phones, and sometimes as a mean of adding to the spice between the main character and love interest. In this book, it was present when it was convenient and not present when it wasn't. Kai could randomly read Jaden's mind when the author wanted us to know that Jaden wanted to jump Kai's bones, but conveniently didn't find out that Jaden was secretly the crown prince or that Olivia wasn't his sister until it was necessary for the plot. That's one of the things that bugs me about the mind reading trope. There are a lot of authors who don't really think about the implications of mind reading. And I mean, depending on how they decide to structure it within their stories, it may not be that big of a deal. The mind reading functions as a, hey, I can send and receive messages from you, but I can't actually go any deeper than that, then okay, that works. You don't have to worry about little things getting caught in there. But if you're going to do the thing where someone can accidentally hear someone's inner thoughts without meaning to, that's a different kettle of fish entirely. A lot of authors do that to be cute, having the main character overhear their love interest thoughts on accident. Aside from the fact that the unfiltered human mind is a lot pettier than I think people realize, there's the issue of secrets to be considered. If you can accidentally overhear someone's thoughts, then it stands to reason that if that person is keeping a massive secret that they don't want you to know about, at some point you will probably overhear a bit of it, unless there's some contrivance available for them to lock you out of their thoughts. Jaden doesn't really have such a contrivance. Kai is able to hear his silly little thoughts about wanting to frick-a-frack her just fine, but she somehow magically never picks up on him being a prince, or Olivia not being his sister, or anything else that would be of interest to her. And that, I suspect, is because the author does not want her, and us, to know that right now. So Kai just conveniently never hears anything inconvenient to the immediate plot. Then, of course, we have the modern speech inserted into a fantasy world trope. I've touched on this before, it's very much a your mileage may vary situation. I personally don't really care too much unless it gets overdone or is really annoying. This book overdoes it and is also annoying, in my opinion. According to my e-reader, this is on page 388, but Kai says, quote, I pick at the fat around my slice of ham. Gout? I'd like to think I'm more like chronic heartburn. That's sexier than gout. Unquote. Page 206, also from the e-reader. Kai says, quote, surprise, I say, smiling. I'm that bitch. Unquote. Page 358, Kai says, quote, do you think that's because I'm no longer infatuated and have untethered myself from around his finger? Or am I being a petty bitch, which you know I embrace with open arms? Unquote. Page 465, Kai narrates, quote, save this realm for these bitches? Oh, no, no, no. I won't be doing that. Liars and schemers and murderers and betrayers, all of them. Jaden, a liar, means nothing to me, not anymore, and Olivia, a thief, means even less. I'll take possession of my amulet, race to Mount Devourer, explain to Sybil or whoever, or who the fuck ever, that I shouldn't be forced to save these people, that I won't be forced to save these people, and if that means I'm jailed in some prison in the farthest realm of all the realms, I'll take that over saving Valandor. Unquote. Page 124, Jaden says, quote, but you using that? He points to the falling blade of the hoe, his mouth widening. That was fucking wild. Unquote. And finally, on page 156, Kai narrates, my mouth hangs open because what the fuck? Unquote. I think you get the point. It's not strictly the profanity. I read Between Two Fires, and that had a metric ton of profanity in it, but the profanity fit the time period. It was creative and realistic for both the setting and the people using it. Saying, that was fucking wild, or, am I being a petty bitch, which you know I embrace with open arms, is how modern TikTokers say things. There comes a point where it's like, why even bother setting this in a high fantasy setting if you're just gonna have everyone talk like it's a current year? Oh, and I was just consulting one of my notes from the book to look for one of the examples I referenced. There's a quote on page 143 from Olivia who says, quote, their beliefs aren't too far from being icky, unquote. And after that I wrote, literally die, Olivia. The modern speech thing aside, I actually have a huge hang up with certain, like, baby words. I used a few examples, ironically, earlier when talking about the trigger warnings, like uncomfy and yucky. I think it's mostly when it's used while discussing adult topics. Like, if your dog poops on the floor and you say, ugh, icky, I'm not going to think twice about it, but if you describe someone's beliefs as icky, I'm kind of ready to scratch my own eyes out. Say disgusting, say bigoted, say nasty, say cruel, say literally any other grown-up words when talking about grown-up shit. Actually, speaking of wanting Olivia to literally die, I clocked an inconsistency in the book. Okay, so right at the beginning of the book, Olivia steals Kai's clothing and items and runs off with them, and Kai runs after her. And Kai narrates, quote, where did she go? I might not be able to see her, but I can still smell her. That distinct and unforgettable sickly sweetness means she's dying. Yeah, that stinks. She didn't have any obvious injuries, besides the one I gave her, but there's something wrong with her. She looked like she hadn't eaten in several days, and her rancid breath, some kind of sickness is eating away at her insides. Unquote. Okay, so, we've established that Olivia is dying. Kai specifically references a kind of sickness that is eating away at her insides. But then, later on, after Jaden and Olivia bring her back to the cottage, Kai narrates, quote, this cottage, even in its best state, is far from impressive. Really, is this what Jaden and Olivia wanted to hide from me? The reason they wouldn't invite me in? I knew that it couldn't be because they're poor and embarrassed by it. I never believed the excuse about me catching miasma from them. They're both healthy. Unquote. So what happened to Olivia dying? Like, you see the problem here, right? Kai explicitly says that Olivia is dying. A sickness is eating away at her insides. So what happened to it? How is Olivia suddenly perfectly healthy again less than a day later? There's a part of me that wants to give the author the benefit of the doubt because there was another character, Zinnia, I think her name was, who experienced a miraculous recovery from the miasma right before Mayford is destroyed, and it's implied that Kai is the reason it happened. It is possible, especially since Olivia mentions feeling different while wearing Kai's amulet that she stole, that she's been cured or otherwise helped by wearing it and might actually be cured. It might be a subtle thing that the author is setting up and intends to follow through on in book 2. Or it could just be that she needed to set up this idea that Kai can tell when someone's dying, not that this is used in any particularly interesting or meaningful way in this book, and just decided to use Olivia for that, forgetting entirely later on that she had told us this character was literally being eaten apart on the inside by some sort of illness. It's a very real possibility, too, if I'm being honest. So, yeah, that was the last one. Had a hell of a time getting through this one. Sanctuary of the Shadow was shorter and had very few strange and funny details in it, which kind of kept me entertained for it. But this one was a bit of a slog to get through. I will probably not be reading the second one, especially after seeing that one review I mentioned earlier. I've got other stuff to get through anyway.